Hi, my name is Sudhanshu, and last week you all had a lot of questions. Why was age so important? Why was defining an age bracket so essential? And why were we so particular about how many young people there are? The short answer, and the easiest way to answer all of your questions, is policy. Now, policy has become a buzzword. It's become for the urban professionals who want to get involved directly or indirectly with the parliament, with politics, political parties. But policy, again, is quite simpler than that. It surrounds us in our daily lives. Policy, or bad policy, is the reason why we have trees in the middle of highways. Bad policy is the reason why our Wi-Fi's don't work most of the time. Bad policy is the reason when you have to wait 2 to 3 hours to visit a government office. Policy surrounds us, and policy that's good can change our lives. Now, a distinguishing factor between good and bad policy is how that policy is created, who it's created for. So when it comes to young people and this vast demographic that exists in India, the policies being made right now aren't necessarily so precise for the age demographic. For the issues that we covered in the last video, you don't have a precise age bracket that you really need to center on. It varies from international and national. We don't really know the specific number of young people, and the government doesn't really help specifying how many young people or youth there really are. So all these factors play a huge part in somewhat getting in the way of the policy that's being made for India's youth. Now, for example, let's think about youth policy being made at an international level. Let's say the UN. The UN sits down, talks about how they want to work with the WHO and ensure that there's a facilitation of health process for a specific demographic of youth that they're working on, which for them would be 15 to 24. But once they come to India, that youth demographic changes from 15 to 29, meaning that the policies that were being made for a much smaller demographic are now being applied to a much larger bracket, which sounds fair and should be, because we should all have access to the opportunities and access to healthcare. But when these policies were being designed for a separate age bracket and it's being applied to a much larger one, the effectiveness of that policy comes down a little and is dispersed in terms of where it's being applied. Let's say, and then it also has a huge impact on the things that we're learning about in terms of the policies being applied to India's young. For example, there's this amazing youth development report called the Commonwealth Youth Program, and it has this thing called the Youth Development Index. I talk a lot about it. But even that Youth Development Index is a bit misconstrued. Why? Because the Commonwealth Youth Program takes into consideration the international youth age, right? So it's the 15 to 24, the most affiliated, the most accepted youth bracket. But when it comes to India's case and a few other countries who have varying age demographics, they're not able to apply the same standards that they apply on a mass level to configure the same indexes in India's case, meaning that some of the results that are coming out can be possibly misconstrued, wrong, false, and inaccurate. And that's super damaging. Why? I mean, you all know that if we need to troubleshoot a problem, we need to have enough knowledge and as precise information to understand where it's affecting. I've said this before, India's young are doing quite miserable. And the reason that we haven't been able to actually help them and bring them out of this and alleviate their situation is not only because we don't have representation, but the people that are making these policies are making it for people that just might not be young or might not be in those characteristics that we need to be focusing on. We have to be cognizant of what we're attaching, what we're doing, what policies we're creating, and for what demographic, bracket, and communities we're making them for. And that's why it's incredibly important that we have precise information being applied to precise policies, which is then being implemented to the precise youth demographic that needs to be uplifted, whether it's economic, whether it's social, or something else. Well, that's it for today's episode.